Hi everyone, it's Tracy from Crochet Rocks, and I'm just going to give you my honest opinion of these hooks that I've been trialing. Now these are the KnitPro Symfonie, and they are pretty hooks. They have some absolutely gorgeous colours going through them, and they are wooden hooks. The pack comes with 5 hooks, and they are actually really lovely. There's an 8mm, and this one is a 6. They're not consistent sizes, and this one I believe is a 5, and then we've got a 4.5 and a small one which is a 3.5. So I've used all of them except the 3.5 so far, and I'll show you this particular one. This is the one that I've used, I'd say, the most, which is a 5, because I made the mile a minute scarf with it, and I used the 5mm, and I made 2 of them, so I got quite a good idea using this hook. So the plus side, this is really shiny and slippy. I thought it might cause drag across the yarn and it would be hard to use, but no, nice and slippy, and so nothing to catch on. There are some kind of little ridges and numbers or whatever up this end, but you don't really go up that end, and this doesn't interfere at all. It's nice and flat anyway, and you can see the number, which I really like, because there's so many times I've picked up a hook, and even on the latest one that I've purchased from Clover, the Clover and More, it's not stamped on like this. It's just kind of stamped into the kind of silicone, but there's no colour, so you just really strain to see the number. So this whole kind of shaft area, really nice and slippy and good to use. Now when you get to the actual hook itself, so many of them angled quite sharply downwards. Now this one has a slight, well, it doesn't really even have a slight. It is so minute that you wouldn't really notice it. So that doesn't cause me a problem there with dropping my stitches. It's got a nice point to get into stitches. You know, when you're going into that very last stitch and it's the chain of the previous row, or you're trying to get into a very tight one, that's good for burrowing into it, so that's good. And they look really lovely. They actually look stunning. They're just beautiful. So that's all the pluses that I can think of right now. I mean, the fact that I'm going to roll around. I was going to say the drawback is they're round, but that's just plain silly. So because they're nice and slippy and shiny, they make you go quite fast sometimes. Because the drawback to this that I can see is this actual hook itself. Let me get it into an area where you can see it. Is very long. It's actually quite long. So and it does tend to as well, because this area here, and I don't know if you're going to see it, if I put my finger now there, you might, it's actually wide. It's kind of an oval shape. I'm not sure how much this is going to show up with the dark wood, but it kind of bows right out, and it's quite angled. So you've got this, see how quite fat that is around there. So because of that, you might see it better from that angle, because it is, you see it there, it actually does come right out like that. It's shaped, so they're quite fat in that respect there, and they're quite deep here. So when you they tend to split the yarn a little bit. So when you're going into a stitch, if you've suddenly the yarn has split and you want to back out of that stitch, because of this length of this hook part, it's really, really hard to back out of the stitch. You can't, because you've not got any slip in the stitch anymore because it's kind of tangled up. So that I found was the major drawbacks, the actual depth of this part here, because that is quite deep, and the width around this area here makes sometimes, when the yarn is not very tightly woven, and some of them are not, it will just cut in there and split the yarn a little bit. But when they go through the yarn like butter, then they're a dream to work with. So this one, this is an enormous one, so you can see it in more detail, that this is actually quite a long hook and quite a wide kind of oval. Pretty though, very pretty. So I made this with one of these hooks, and this is one of my tutorials. It's the ribbed phone case, and it's made with front post stitches, and it took me ages. It was an absolute nightmare. This was the yarn that I've got in my latest giveaway. Well, it depends when you watch this as to whether it is, but it's part of the Hobbycraft yarn haul and review that I did, and it's called Groove is in the Yarn. So it's not particularly tightly wound. I don't think I've got any on me here to show you, but it is, if I go inside out, you may see a little bit of the texture of it. You see, it's not a tightly woven yarn, and therefore it was easy for it to just split it open and catch. And once it caught, see what I mean? It's just not really woven. So once it caught, it was a complete and utter nightmare, but I thought I will persevere and make the whole thing with that hook. So because I wanted to give them a really, really good working over to see how they were. So all in all, I've used them all week or more, and I'll show you on this Poundland yarn. I did bring some grey, depending on whether it's easy to show up. I've got some Aran and some, this is meant to be chunky, but it's enormous. So I'll just show you with this, and I'll use the let me see, where are we? Where's my hooks? This one might be very small, but we'll try it, and we'll just go and see how we get on with it. They are very thin. I've not used this one before. This is tiny, absolutely tiny, and that is very difficult really to hold. It's like holding a toothpick to try and crochet with. I have to say, I haven't noticed that with the others. This one, the size 5, which is the one I use mostly, I found that quite slim to hold, but it didn't bother me. It wasn't so slim that I felt like it was strange. It wasn't really that much slimmer than the metal hooks are. So it was fine. And it felt good. It felt good in my hand. But having said what I did, this is actually going through quite easy. It is possible that the smaller one is not quite as angled as the rest, and it's actually behaving itself. So yeah, I think it's probably a little bit of a better one of the set, because that's not going to be very wide. So the smaller maybe the hook, the better. That didn't go quite through cleanly, and once it doesn't, it tends to kind of mess everything. I'm just going to try and put that in my finger so I can hold it easier. You can see what I'm doing, but that's actually not bad. That I find this one a dream. I can't fault it. It's very, very slim to hold though, and I'm not sure if that would cause me to ache a little bit, because it honestly is like holding a toothpick. And I think I'd have to try to put a grip on there, because that does actually feel quite uncomfortable being that small, that slim. It's causing me to really scrunch these fingers up. And so that, I think, is a drawback. I can't imagine that it's very strong either. You know, it's got to be weak, isn't it? That slim. Having said that, I've not heard of anyone who commented that said they've got them. Most people said that they have them and they love them. So I've not heard of anyone say that they broke. See what I mean about that? But it's if that was a larger hook, it would have been harder to get out of that once it's split. But no, that one's not too bad, apart from I would say the width of it. So I'm not going to undo that. I'm just going to use this DK. It's a bit fatter anyway. And find my number 5. Oh, actually, I've got a 4.5. We'll use that one. See how we get on with that. I don't really want to tangle up all my little balls of yarn though. They're all down there. Well, they will be in a minute. Probably will tangle, knowing my luck. I got into a complete mess with my Hayfield Spirit yarn. But that was because of the stupid way they wind the ball, so it wasn't really me. So this is a 4.5, and I can see already that this bit is fatter than the other one. But this is quite well woven, this yarn. I can feel it catching as I'm going through. It feels like it's popping through, if you know what I mean by that. I can feel that catching on the sides, but it's not cutting through or anything. So let's try just simple single crochet. That's actually not too bad, is it? It's going through quite nicely. It may be just the larger hooks, slightly fatter at the head, which causes that to catch a little bit more. I must say that even though it's a sort of slim hook, maybe it's the size of this fatter head or something, but it does make the chain slightly bigger than if you were just crocheting with, say, any other hook. The chain itself isn't a bad size, so that's not too bad. So I think the smaller hooks, they function better by going through the yarn, but then you might encounter that problem with it splitting. So let's go for, then, in that case, the 5. This is the one that I had my issues with, although it wasn't this yarn. So it could have been, a lot of it could have been the yarn, because it was a very kind of loosely spun yarn. I'm going to have company now, so this I might have to pause the video in a second, otherwise you're going to hear someone burst through the door. But already I can feel that kind of catch in there, which could be annoying. So we'll go through and see how that works. It is wider. It's definitely wider, and it does, you can feel the width of that does kind of catch on the stitch as it goes through. There you are. See, it's a little bit different, a little bit harder, I think, on these wider ones. They are lovely, don't get me wrong. Then once, if you're crocheting and you're not getting snags, then it is lovely. But you can see on my tutorial, see that one snagged. Now if you want to back out of it, it is nigh on impossible to actually back out of that stitch. So that's the only drawback, and that's what I was finding with this particular hook and on that tutorial. Sorry about that, I just paused it because he came in. So let's carry on just for a little bit. See, again, it's snagging. You can see that just going through and catching. So that's the problem I found with them. If once you get past this particular foundation row, I wonder if it will change. So we'll have a look. I know I've not done a particularly big swatch, but that's not a bad thing in that case. So let's go on to the second line. And see, it's already slowing me down, this hook, because I have to get it all in, and it's just not free. not like not like the smaller ones were, I find. And I just think this part here is just that bit too wide. A few people that messaged me said they had their husband file them down. Now I would worry that if I did that, I would be kind of doing the wrong thing, taking too much off. But whether they filed it here to make it shorter, but to me it's just too wide here. It's catching as I go through, and I can feel it. I'm forcing it. It's like it's popping. I don't know if you understand what I mean, but it's I feel it go in and I feel it pop through the other side, and I have to sort of pull it through like that. So no, this particular yarn is doing the same thing as the yarn that I used. The groove is in the yarn. So the smaller ones don't seem to have that issue, but they are so slim they'd hurt my hand to hold them. So let's try the huge one. Let's try the big boy and see how we get on with that. Now this is yarn from a store called is it yes, Pound Stretcher. So this is a big fat yarn. It says chunky, but it's bigger, I reckon. I don't think it's chunky. It's got to be super chunky. So that's a UK term. So I think you'll call that like a super bulky. But again, I'm feeling that part there is so wide. I'm having to pull it through, and it's thudding as it comes through. And even if I make that wider, it's still the same. So let's try going along. Again, I'm having to feel like I'm forcing it through, because this part is wider than the actual crochet hook part that measures the size. And I just find it, see how it's slowing me down. Now normally I would be able to just get on and crochet quite quickly. Let's try and try that again with making the chain bigger if we can, because I tried to do them loosely. It didn't seem to want to know. I didn't really need to get rid of my slip knot, did I? But I feel it catching, so let's make them a little bit looser if we can. See, even so, still, maybe it's because I'm holding it hard. I don't know. No, it's still doing the same thing. Even though I'm trying to be as loose as I can, and you can see my chains are much bigger, it's still, that wide part is still having trouble getting through, if you see what I mean. And then I'll just have big, baggy chains. I'm not really enjoying this at all with these bigger ones. I couldn't crochet a large project with it. I wouldn't be able to do it. It'd drive me completely and utterly mental. So although it's doing it, and they are gorgeous to look at, I don't think I could cope with that. That would no, that would annoy me far too much. So all in all, there's quite a lot of pluses. They are absolutely gorgeous to look at. This is nice and slippy. The lettering's really good. They're nice and pointy, etc. They're not angled down, but the shape and size of this hook and the way it flares out, like, I don't know if I can show you without making it, you see what I mean? It just sort of flares out, and they all do it, and they get wide here, and that's just doesn't allow it to go through too easily. So that's the KnitPro Symfonie. Some good and some bad. Thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, consider subscribing to my channel. I've got quite a lot of giveaways going on, and lots of tutorials, so give it a watch, and thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.